welcome to session 3 of our optimization track. We'll get started so we don't disrupt anyone's one-on-ones or other things you may have scheduled for this afternoon. For those of you who did not attend a previous optimization track, my name is Allison Graylis, and I serve as founder and president of Women in Manufacturing, the only national association representing women in manufacturing year-round. And we're thrilled to have you here. Our next speaker is Shane YOUNT. He's principal and author of Competitive Solutions. Many of you may know Shane, as this is his 4th year participating in this conference, and he will be presenting on the topic of strategies for driving execution, engagement, and ultimately earnings. Please help me in welcoming Shane YOUNT.
Thank you, Allison. All right, good afternoon, y'all. Welcome to my session. Thanks for choosing this one. So I hope in the next 35 minutes or so I'll validate that you made a good decision. So you signed up for this thing, or you're in this room because you had some interest in this idea of a business boot camp, right? What in the world is that? So over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to give you a narrative, right? A narrative that's going to run a little counter to some of the other presentations you've heard at this event. Because I'm going to ask you for the next 35 minutes to be a bit introspective and intentional as you look within your current transformation, CI process, whatever you're calling it. I want you to really look into that and reflect on that as you listen to me paint a narrative. So for the first half, I'm going to share kind of what I see industry-wise happening with transformation, with CI, with lean journeys, with much of the messaging today. And then I'm going to talk about what I believe to be the compelling business need for this thinking around a boot camp, right? So just a little bit about kind of my firm, headquartered in North Carolina. We are Tar Heels, so we're very happy right now. We've written a number of books. My latest book, Leading Your Business Forward, I'll be happy to provide y'all copies of this if you stop by our booth after the show. And also, I'm going to be talking about a number of clients through this topic. And these are just a few of the ones that we've worked with since 1991. So let's kind of start a narrative if we could. How did we get here, right? And my friends at Milliken kind of talked a little bit about the evolution over the years of different types of programs. And I want to start here because this is really where I began my career, right? In the mid-'80s, right? Working for a company called Purdue Farms, right? You may know Purdue Farms. I killed chickens, right? They recruited me right out of school, went to work there, and Frank Purdue came to me in the mid-'80s and said, Shane, I want you to go down to Florida to Philip Crosby's School of Quality Management. I want you to go down there and figure out quality circles and do all this stuff, come back. We had 9 plants at the time, and I want you to deploy quality circles, right? And we did that, and we got a lot of notoriety. In fact, in 1989, we were featured on a program called Tom Peters in Search of Excellence, right? You may remember that guy. 1991, I started Competitive Solutions, and we moved into a decade-plus time of teaching companies how to do all these different acronyms, right? Y'all have heard about a lot of these today. We built what I call the proverbial Caesar's Palace, right? You've seen those slides in many presentations today with the foundations and the columns and the roofs. I got attached to George Fisher, who had just left Motorola, came to Eastman Kodak and said, Shane, we want you to take us through this whole Six Sigma process. And so from 2000 to 2008, many of y'all were exactly there. You were doing all these processes. You were deploying all these initiatives. And then we got into some recessions. We got into some times that were less than profitable. And so the message of many of your organizations, and I know a lot of y'all because my firm works with many of the folks here, you said, we're going to save our way to success. We're going to take those teams, and we're going to take all those tools, and we're going to take that Caesar Palace document that we all have, and we're going to say, we're going to start saving our way to success. And so we would run Kaizen events, and the last hour or the last day, we get the finance people in there and say, book $1 million of savings, right? And we felt really good about that. And so for those years, we kind of focused on that, and we were feeling pretty good, but that brings us to now. And this is what I'm seeing today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm seeing it in some of y'all's organizations in this room today. If you talk to your people, you're having your people tell you, number one, we're overloaded. Number two, we have overly prescriptive processes. I was with a company last week that I met at this event last year. They have a 4-inch binder, right? That 4-inch binder has 28 tabs. In that binder of those 28 tabs are all their systems that they've built, and it overwhelms people to the point that we've got meeting saturation, unsustainability, and quite frankly, a lot of confused leaders. I call these leaders, or this era, the what the hell is going on era, right? Because there's a lot of people that I see and my team sees today that are saying, yeah, we went through this journey, right? We started back here in the 80s with all these things, but today we're overwhelmed. We're overloaded. So I want to make a case for you of why it's time to run what I call a business boot camp, right? But if you need some further evidence, let's talk about this, right? Because, see, there's not many millennials in this room right now. There's a few at this conference. I sat beside one at the conference for lunch a minute ago that was talking about rock climbing. That's definitely a millennial, all right? That was his hobby, right? Many of y'all probably don't do that, all right? But if you think about where we are today, I would use this chart right here to kind of tell you that there are fatal flaws that happened in the teen years, those years that I described a minute ago, that are still haunting us today. To me, it's the compelling reason of why we need to think about teams in terms of a business boot camp. And I'll just call your attention to that slide right there. And if you look at those blue circles, listen, they resonate with all y'all in this room. You have those and probably 10 more right now in your organization today. But the point of that slide isn't those blue circles. It's what you see in the center, right? Because what's powering performance in your organization today? That's the question I want you thinking about. What's powering performance in your organization today? The title of this session, Earnings, Engagement, Execution. What's driving that? Well, I'll tell you that many of us today are still using a flawed model to power performance. Despite all the teams and all the training and all the initiatives, I'm going to say that many of y'all in this room are masterful at those 3 Ps. Now, you read those 3 words, proximity, persuasion, position. So I'm accusing you of using those 3 Ps to drive performance. Let me give you some examples of that, right? I was at a tour of a large manufacturing site in the Midwest about a week ago. They had all these blue circles. And one of the things I like to do when I tour somewhere for the very first time is I like to ask a simple question. The question is this: are you winning or losing, right? Because, see, I'm going to suggest to you that all the things that are being talked about at this conference, if your colleagues, your employees, your leaders can't answer that question, it's all for naught, right? It's all for naught. So I'm in this manufacturing center in the Midwest. I'm taking a tour with the North American Vice President of Manufacturing. We're on a packaging line of roughly 40 operators. They had every one of these blue circles. At the end of the line, there was an and-on board flashing red because they had had some unscheduled downtime, right? I step up to this operator and I say, hey, real quick question. Right now on your line, are you winning or losing? Now, he could have looked at the and-on board. He could have referenced a message he got in the shift huddle that morning. He could have talked about the visual factory boards that are up at the end and the beginning and end of every line. He could have answered it in any number of ways using any number of the tools that y'all have in your organization today, but here was his answer. He said, we have a supervisor. He hasn't been on our floor, hadn't been on the line, hadn't been in our area all week. I was taking a tour on a Wednesday. He hadn't been out here. So his answer was, we must be what? How do you think he answered it? Winning or losing? Winning. All that training, all those years, all those initiatives, all the visuals and money, and at the end of the day, the operator answered the question of winning and losing by saying, the proximity of my supervisor to this team is how I'm going to answer this question. He hasn't been out here all week, so you know what? We must be winning, right? Second word up there, you see persuasion. Let me make a big statement. Go back to those team years that I talked about. See, we have a false positive. We think our teams are functional. I'm going to tell you, most teams are dysfunctional. In fact, there are organizations my organization is working with today that they won't even let us use the word team because it has such negative connotations. And I understand why. Because I believe today there are very few true teams. You know why? Because they're powered by selective engagement, not collective accountability. I want to bring this home to you all as attendees in this room. There is probably a person or a couple of people that you said to allow you to be at this event, hey, I'm going to be traveling, I'm going to be in Chicago for a couple of days. While I'm gone, keep this train on the tracks. Probably those go-to people that you lean on and rely on. See, I think there's a false positive in teams today. We think we have collective accountability, but candidly, most teams are powered by selective engagement. And you see it with the peer persuasion. I go to those individuals that I know I can count on. And I build a team powered by the select few, not the collective many. That last P up there is position. Y'all have that. Many of y'all in this room, you have the title of positional authority. I get to go on a lot of site visits with many of y'all at your levels, right? And it's always interesting to me. I'd love to do those tours with y'all when it's a surprise, right? I would love to hop on a corporate jet and go surprise a site. But see, we don't ever do that, right? We let them know we're coming. I'm doing one next week. They've known for 3 months we're coming. They know when we're arriving. They have thoroughly scripted, ladies and gentlemen, that visit, right? From our tour route, because they don't want us talking to some moron that knows nothing, right? From the slide deck that we're going to view, right? It's been vetted beyond vet, right? From the time we arrive, we get picked up. We don't get to get rental cars. We get picked up. We get dropped off. It is so managed. The positional authority of us being present for that 4-hour visit drives a false focus, urgency, and accountability. And see, I'm going to suggest to you that that's what's missing in many of our organizations today. We've built supposedly teams. We think our teams are mature, but I would suggest to you our teams are still powered by proximity, persuasion, and position, despite all those points. You may still be wondering, well, what's some additional evidence, Shane? Let me give you a couple of points that I see in organizations. There's a feeling. It's not often said, but here's the feeling. Here's some great tools. Now go find a problem so you can practice the tool. We don't like to say that, but I will tell you that's how people feel. Number 2, a hidden factory is used to generate data and metrics that few folks know and even less understand. Right? Do you have a hidden factory of people generating data? Can people answer the question of are we winning or losing? That's ultimately what it's all about. Right? Number 3rd point, meetings. I'm going to talk about meetings. I want you to remember the number 6. All right? I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. Meetings feel like an in addition to the work, not the enabler of. I know there are you all in this room today that you look at your outlook for the week, and your thought is, how am I going to get any work done when I'm in meetings from the time I arrive to the time I leave? Right? That is symptomatic of the situation we have today. Next point. Had a president of a large cereal manufacturer who said this to me, our teams feel like a failed social experiment. Because when we built those teams in the 80s, we focused on what you saw on the earlier slide. We focused on personality. We focused on the get-along skills. We focused on all these things that at the time told us we need to do that. But we never went back. And see, that's what I'm going to emphasize to you all. We never went back to our teams and gave them any more than that. So we have a situation today where, yeah, they feel like a failed social experiment. Now, if I'm a leader of a team and I've got all that, guess what I do? As the leader, as the business unit leader, as the frontline supervisor, as the departmental manager, you know what I say? It's just easier if I just do it myself. It's just easier if I go back to proximity, persuasion, and position because I'm good at it. I know it can get stuff done. I know it can drive the proper focus, urgency, and accountability. So it just let me go and let me do it because it's easier if I do it myself. And then here comes a lot of y'all in this room. And you look at your culture and you do some engagement surveys, right? And you talk to people and you're trying to get a pulse of the company. And we say, well, guess what? Our culture's the problem. So we got to fix our culture. So not only is the problem, it's a fix, which is totally wrap your head around that, right? And then I want to close with this final point about kind of current state. You're still uncertain? I'd ask you to read this article. April of last year. They looked at a couple of our accounts, featured us in this article, and this is the premise. You see it in quotes there. The underlying issue of any transformation, ladies and gentlemen, and I firmly believe this, if our teams do not have business acumen and execution skills, it doesn't matter what your Caesar Palace looks like. It doesn't matter how much you staff your transformation initiatives. At the end of the day, if they don't understand winning and losing and they don't understand execution, it's all for naught. And that was the premise of the April edition. Let's stop talking about culture, right? Now, that flies in the face of some of the people talking at this event. I recognize that, right? See, we love to talk about culture when it feels good, right? We love to tell the positive story of culture when we think we've arrived. I'll suggest to you, you want to build a culture, it has nothing to do with how we feel. It has everything to do with what we're doing to move the business forward, right? So we've got to give those teams, I'm going to come back to those teams again. We've got to go back in our journey to those teams, and we've got to create a compelling business need. In essence, a boot camp, right? Let's go back to those early team structures and team events, and we've got to recalibrate what teams are designed to do. So what I'm talking about, I want to show you this model. You should have gotten a handout on this when you walked in, right? Here's what I'm describing, right? We need to create a team business boot camp so our teams have 4 what I call non-negotiables, right? The first one I'm going to talk about is this idea of business acumen. This fundamental idea of, do I know if we're winning or losing? How are we using metrics and dashboards and scorecards? Then I want to talk about execution. How do we move from how people feel to what people do? Then I want to talk about this idea of meetings. I'm going to come back to this idea of 6. I ask you to remember that number 6. Then I want to talk about leaders, all right? So let's talk for just a second about business acumen. Because ultimately, this is the pull. My comment that says, if I don't understand the business, everything related to transformation and lean is abstract. So how do we build business acumen? Well, I'll give you a very simple metaphor, right? I hope you'll remember this metaphor. 2 pictures. The one on the left, what is it? It's a thermometer. The one on the right, I grew up in a house that had one of those. Most of our homes don't have that anymore. We have the Nest and all the fancy stuff, right? But I grew up in a home that had that. Very similar words, right? Only a few letters separate those 2 words. But here's what I'm going to suggest to you. The reason we don't have good business acumen is because our metrics and our dashboards and our scorecards are the one on the left. They're thermometers, ladies and gentlemen. They're passive reports, right? We are generating, I said it earlier, we have hidden factories generating thermometers. We have finance generating reports. We have SAP and Oracle generating reports. Just because we bought the functionality, we feel compelled to run the data and run reports, right? We're overwhelming the organization with a whole bunch of thermometers and very few thermostats. Now let's talk about the difference very quickly. Maybe you're like me when you checked into this hotel. I got here last night, right? My wife and I have been married 25 years. The one thing we fight about more in our marriage in 25 years is the temperature of our home, right? So when I travel, I get to be the king of that room. And the first thing I do is I go in there, and what do? Maybe like y'all did, all right? I'm taking that thermostat down to as low as it will go, right? Because no one's going to be complaining about how cold it is in there, right? I can go to that wall, and I did yesterday, and I can see the temperature is. It's got the thermostat capability to do something with it. It's also got the thermometer capability. What do you have in your organization? Because the reality is this, we've got to have a thermostatic application of metrics. That's what's missing fundamentally in our teams. They have no thermostatic application of understanding business acumen, right? Now, I'll talk about point number 1 just real quickly here. We got to stop worrying about what we're tracking. Hear me clearly. We got to stop worrying about what we're going to track, and we got to define how we're going to use the data. Too much time and energy is spent arguing about the data, and we haven't defined at all how are we going to use the data. And I made it simple for you. It rhymes. Educate, facilitate, and motivate. We need to define each of those in our teams. Your team needs to have, how do you onboard people to the team? Welcome to our team. Here's how we do business. Here's the most important thing to this team. It's called our scorecard. It tells us if we're winning or losing. They need to get that day 1, ladies and gentlemen. And most of your HR people, they've not built in anything to their onboarding and assimilation around welcome to the team, here's how we do business. Most of the time, our scorecards and metrics, you wouldn't even find them in an onboarding and an assimilation process. Well, if we don't make it the first thing we talk about, don't be surprised when it's the last thing people care about. Let me say that again. If we don't make it the first thing we talk about, don't be surprised if it's the last thing they care about. Facilitate. I'll give you one quick thing here. You should never walk into a meeting without a scorecard facilitating that meeting. I do a lot of work with Pfizer. I'm going to give you just a real quick visual. I love Pfizer. Pfizer headquartered in Manhattan. They were trying to do an inversion to get to Ireland, and then Trump blew that up. But now they're still in Manhattan, all right? And Monday morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, Ian Reed, CEO, walks into his executive boardroom. On the screen of that boardroom, it's not the agenda, it's not the ground rules. What you see on the screen of that boardroom every Monday morning is the scorecard of how did Pfizer perform the previous 7 days. That scorecard is color-coded, red or green. There's no yellow, there's no blue. We either won or lost last week. That methodology cascades down to every single team throughout the world. There's 110,000 people that work for Pfizer. You have to be through that cascade by Thursday at midnight. Because Friday, what they do is they walk around at every respective site. I got to do this in Puerto Rico last year. Stand at a guard shack at the end of the week. As people are leaving, they'll say, before this gate opens, you're going to answer a question. Did we win or lose this week? See, ladies and gentlemen, scorecards are used to facilitate. You want to make your meetings improve? Then the whole purpose of that meeting needs to be to move our business forward, right? How can it do that if we don't have data facilitating the meeting? And then last point, motivate, just real quickly. I see a lot of scorecards that are all green that are worthless. Scorecards that are all green that are worthless. In fact, I would suggest to you the biggest thing killing business acumen is green scorecards. because we see it as a calendar-driven activity. We set the goals at the beginning of the year, and if we're lucky enough, I was a plant manager, if I was lucky enough to sandbag and hold back, or just by God got lucky, right, and I'm green February 1st, then you know what, I'm not going to upset the apple cart. So we put it on autopilot, and guess what? We went right from the opportunity to have a thermostat to one more thermometer, because it's just a passive report. Pfizer says you're green for 90 days. Guess what? We're having a metric review, non-negotiable. You're red for 90 days. We're having a metric review, non-negotiable. So that process becomes an active positioning process. So we are driving to a single source of truth, right? Do your teams have a single source of truth? I can't tell you the boardrooms I get into when finance puts up a chart of data and the whole conversation is an argument about, well, is the data the most relevant data? Did we count this? Did we include this? Did we depreciate this? And the whole meeting is just an arguing of, what does the data even mean, right? We've got to get to a single source of truth, and candidly, if you want your teams to go back and recalibrate what teams need to do, take one point away that I'm saying this afternoon. They've got to be able to answer that question, are we winning or losing? Because it doesn't matter what you're doing in transformation. If they can't answer that, just like that HBR article suggests, it's all for naught. Let me give you the second element of transformation. You want to run a business boot camp? It's time to get serious about accountability and execution. What do I mean by get serious? Get serious to me means we got to stop making accountability about how we feel and make it about what we do. What do you mean by that, Shane? Well, what I'm suggesting is that we need to be in our teams having a conversation. Here's what it looks like. What have you done since we were together last to move our business forward? So I've got this scorecard, these metrics that are thermostatic, telling me if we're winning or losing. I need to get serious about accountability and action registers and action lists that actually mean something, that says if we're losing on our scorecard, you are going to tell me what you're going to do to move this business forward since the last time we were together, so that the metrics define execution, a thermostatic execution. We also have to get, ladies and gentlemen, very serious about the capability of measuring engagement. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Our data suggests that in a team of 20 people, you can physically validate 6 as engaged. Done this 25 years, all right? My data says in a team of 20 people, you can physically validate 6 as engaged. 6 people that volunteer, 6 people that you defer to as a leader, 6 people that you are grooming and developing as a leader, 6 people that help you move the business forward. So that poses a question. You might be thinking, well, thank God I got 6. I didn't think I had that many, all right? Because some days it doesn't feel that way. Where are the other 14, right? I will say this. I love Lockheed Martin. They're one of my clients. They coined this phrase, it's theirs, not mine. They say we had a culture of people flying beneath the radar screen. We had a culture of people flying beneath the radar screen within teams because we made teams and accountability and execution more about how people feel and less about what people did. We've got to get to a place where we can measure engagement. Stop by my booth later today. I'm going to talk about how you measure engagement. Because if I've got a team of 20 people, I need to be able to validate. How many actions have you taken? How many have you closed? What value did that bring to the scorecard to moving our business forward? Now, that's a scary conversation for some people. Because I'll suggest this last point in red. The biggest demotivating factor in teams today is that disparity of engagement. They look around their colleagues and they say, well, those people are pulling their weight. These people aren't, right? Why is that? Our teams are fundamentally broken in many organizations. We've wallpapered it over with tools and with transformation talk and that Caesar palace of activity and initiatives. We've wallpapered it over. But fundamentally, I'm suggesting to you, we need to have a business boot camp around execution. Next thing I want to talk about, because I'm going to run out of time quickly. Meeting saturation. It was one of the elements I said in the what the hell years that's going on right now, meeting saturation. Leaders in no more than 6 hours of meetings a week. And I'm passionate about this. If you as a leader are in more than 6 hours of meetings a week, ladies and gentlemen, I'm suggesting to you, your teams are broken. Your meetings are broken. Your messaging is broken. Your business acumen and execution is broken. And there are a lot of y'all that you love your tier meetings, right? I was in one last week, all right? The tier meeting started at 6 o'clock in the morning. The leadership team didn't get out of those meetings until 1:30 in the afternoon. And guess what? The content was redundant. The content was ridiculous, but that was our process. It's in the 4-inch 3-ring binder that talks about tier meetings and how we have this waterfall cascade, right? And we do it, and we do it, and we start our work at 1:30, and we complain about it like crazy because it doesn't feel like it's moving the business forward. We've got to get our head around, ladies and gentlemen, what a good meeting looks like. Because I sit in entirely too many bad ones, and probably you do too. We've got to get to a place where, you see my second point there, where we're in a rhythm like Pfizer. We're in a rhythm that starts Monday morning at 10 and closes Thursday night, and we know what happens in that rhythm. The content of that rhythm, the consistency of that rhythm, the conversation of that rhythm, because it's about one thing, moving our business forward using the data that we agreed to and the execution that we require, so that every time we come together, we've got a system that is moving those metrics to a thermostatic state. I would ask you as homework for my session to do some math in the next 2 days. And come to my booth and tell me your equation conclusion. It's real simple. How many meetings are you in a typical week, and what does that equate to in hours of time? Do that for homework for me, and come to my booth and talk to me in the next day and a half. I'd be curious to know your numbers. How many meetings are you in a week, and what does that equate to in hours of time? Because I believe that's the biggest crisis facing many of our organizations today. It has nothing to do with customers and market share and supply chains. It has to do with the dysfunctional internal team system that we have wallpapered over and haven't fully drilled into to discuss. My last point there, meetings need to be viewed as the enabler of. That's what I'm talking about. Pfizer's at a place in their culture, and I've worked with them for a long time, and they're not perfect, but they're pretty darn close to what I'm describing. There is a high tolerance, right? A very high tolerance that you better have your meeting together, because if it's not, I'm walking out of here. I have zero time to walk into a meeting that doesn't run with this type of process. Last thing I want to hit on real quick before I run out of time. Talked about teams. Well, listen, our leaders need a boot camp too, y'all. Because a lot of us as leaders, we're really good at those 3 Ps again. We're really good at swooping in, putting the red cape on, saving the day. That's proximity, right? We're good at that. A lot of y'all wouldn't be managers and vice presidents if you weren't great, right, at putting the red cape on, swooping in, and saving the day. That's proximity. A lot of y'all would not be where you are today if you couldn't make a compelling argument. That's persuasion. And a lot of y'all wear the mantle well of positional authority. And a lot of us as leaders, we grew up. And we said, if I can master those things, if I can get to those 3 Ps, then I'll be a successful leader. Not in this new economy. Not with the teams in the shape they're in today. Because what that creates is, that creates a dependency. Because if I swoop in and save the day, guess what? My teams will expect that of me every day. The biggest issue, I believe, today is frontline leaders, right? We've got to talk to our frontline leaders. We've got to give them what I call 8 leadership attributes. I'll talk more about this after the session if anybody wants to hang around, but there are 8 non-negotiable leadership attributes that if your teams don't have, your leaders don't have, I'll suggest to you we will not be able to fix the flaw we have back with the team system. Right? So what am I saying here? We got to move from defense to offense, our leaders. Bottom line, we got to move from defense to offense. Number 2, we need to be able to articulate to them winning and losing. They need to be able to have this skill set here. So ultimately, we can get down here to this performance management conversation and actually have real data, to have real dialogue, so we can finally get to real development. Because that process is broken in most of our organizations. So I'm getting the red light here. What have I said? 2016, we did a survey of people like Harley-Davidson, Pfizer, a lot of our clients. They said the top 3 issues facing our organization today. 1 is sustainability. Number 2, it's meeting saturation. We can't lead if we're in meetings. And number 3, it's this idea of what do leaders do in this new environment? How do we move from 3 Ps into a leader that understands those 8 attributes? So I'll suggest to you this in closing. The issues facing some of y'all in this room, not all, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but not all, but many of the issues facing what I believe is the reality, is the straight talk that I think we need to have organizationally, is we need to look at our teams and we need to look at our leaders and we need to ask these 4 bullet points right here, right? Is there a business acumen process that discerns winning and losing? Number 2, is there an execution process that moves the dialogue to action and affirmation, and it's more about what you do, less how you feel? Number 3, that we get to a place where we take charge of our meetings. You take nothing else away that I say in this session, ladies and gentlemen, we have got to get in control our meeting process. We cannot drive the proper execution, acumen, and accountability when we're sitting in meetings, and it's out of control, right? And last point here, we've got to give our leaders a process to get to what I call clarity, connectivity, and consistency. So what have I said in this session very quickly? We got to confront. Go back to those team years. You got to ask yourself, your teams, do they have the foundation that they need to truly be the deployment vehicle for your strategy? That's the question we need to be asking, because today I don't think they are. I think they're fundamentally flawed. I would love to give you all some more information. You've got some flyer in front of you. Come by and see me at my booth. I would love to give out these books, as many as I have for y'all, and I would love to continue the conversation there with you. I know I've gone over time. I'll be happy to entertain questions in here if you don't have a meeting. Thank y'all so very much for attending my session. I hope you enjoyed it.